right, welcome back to Shane's DIY. We're reaching the finish line here on this series to actually get the forward programming done on our AeroScout. We've learned some new things. Like the last episode, I wanted to update everybody on a few things we've learned as we go through these episodes. We're getting more information with commenters and people that have asked for help on getting things set up. So we've learned some new things. I wanted to share a couple of things with you. First of all, the developer Frankie got an update to the forward programming. So the software we updated on episode 1, version 0.53, he's recently released version 0.54 that just fixed a couple of bugs he found. So it's a simple update. We'll go through that. If you stick with me towards the end, we'll get into those details and where to go grab these new files and a couple of other things. Another thing, I spent some time on emailing back and forth with one of the viewers that was having some trouble getting T28. Name's Tim, and he was struggling to get the SAFE switch set up properly to get get it to go between the different 3 flight modes. So I spent a lot of time with him. Then the developer Francisco, and he looked at some log files, and we were able to identify that he had activated. I'll go and find it for you, show you. Make sure that when you're trying to set up your system, you do not enable max throws. If you turn on max throws, it won't set the right values because it needs to be sending a negative 100 to positive 100 when you move the sticks and flip the switch when you're assigning switches and doing that. One of the methods of assigning your safe switch is moving the sticks down and in. This is on some planes, by the way. The stock AeroScout, for example, doesn't have this option. My Timber X does, the Turbo Timber does, and his T28 does. Most of the new planes do. They don't have the safe modes or the forward programming locked down quite as much. So you can actually assign your own channels. The AeroScout and stock configuration, the channels are fixed at channels 5 and 6. 6 for panic and 5 for safe mode. You can't do anything about that until you unlock it, which we're going to do today. But so if you're going to do this procedure where you move the sticks down and in, and then you flip your switch 5 times, that procedure requires that those rates be set at minus 100 to plus 100. So don't turn on those extended rates. Make sure you don't have any dual rates configured. They need to be at a standard 100% rates when you do that. So that's something we learned that gave us some grief. Make sure you don't have that max throws enabled. He got it all set up, and he had a successful maiden, so we're excited about that. It was fun to watch. Francisco also has been developing some custom firmware that will be soon released in the official version of EdgeTX, but he's got a TextGen, it's called, a programming option that uses the Spektrum text generator telemetry to do the Avion ESC programming. So you can go in there and do the reverse thrust programming and all that. He's got a video on his channel showing how that works. You are now able to use the stick method to go through and set up the menus for the Avion ESCs with that custom firmware. You can get it right now if you want to utilize his custom firmware. At the end of this procedure, I'm going to show you how that, where to get that. I haven't installed it on this radio yet, and I'm just going to keep it with my current 2.8.0. So there is some new EdgeTX firmware, but for now we don't need that for what we're doing, to just do the forward programming setup. Okay, so I don't want to waste a lot more of your time. I want to get right into resetting the forward programming, go through that procedure. We'll do a lot of the little details and show you some more of the background stuff at the end if you want to stick around for that. But let's get right into the safe setup, and we'll go through that. First thing you want to do is get your transmitter, which we've already done through this process, but get your transmitter programmed to the, create the model, get it set up, and get it bound to the airplane and actually working. You want to make sure that everything functions, the control surfaces do what you expect them to do, and then before you jump into this other process. I'm assuming also now you've already done the software installation, you've already updated the firmware in your receiver that we did in episode 2, so that it is actually prepared to be unlocked, because if you haven't done that, you're not going to make much progress in this episode. You've got to unlock the transmitter first if you've got a factory bind and fly receiver that is locked for forward programming. So anyway, this episode assumes you've done that other stuff already. Once you've done that, you make sure that your ailerons, elevator, rudder, all that moves in the correct directions. You need to assign your switch Now, this is what seems to be getting a bunch of people hung up. Now I've got an old video that shows using some logical switches and special functions, which I actually have on this one. Let me show you that real quick, just because I'm going to have to disable that. Okay, so currently, because the stock configuration for the AeroScout has the safe channel set and locked at channel 5, panic mode is assigned to channel 6. That's not the case with all airplanes, so if you've got a different airplane, look at your manual. It'll tell you. If it shows you that you can do the procedure where you move the sticks in and out and flip the switch 5 times, you have a model that allows you to change that channel. So you don't need to do this procedure for that kind of an airplane. But if you followed along with the different videos I've done and you've got an AeroScout or a model that has those channels locked, if I go into the model setup, I'm going to go backwards. I currently have my special functions set up to mix the channels 5 and 6 to give me the channels I wanted. So if you look, when I flip my switch, I've got, so that direction, that's my safe mode with channel 5 and channel 6 set for plus 100. When I go to my medium rates, which is like an intermediate mode, it changes channel 5 to 0 and channel 6 to plus 100. Then when I go to high rates, it changes channel 5 to minus 100, channel 6 to plus 100. So I've got that switch set up to mix channels 5 and 6 currently. So you're not going to need to do that if your airplane lets you change the channels. That procedure I did in that video a while back with the AeroScout showing you how to do that helped a lot of people to get it set up. But a lot of the new airplanes are coming out where you can actually change those channels, so that's not necessary. So the first thing I'm going to do is disable. Eventually I can come back and delete them. So, but for now I'm just going to disable these special functions. So let's disable all these special functions because I'm going to need to go in and just set a switch to it. That's all I need is a switch now. I don't need all this fancy stuff. So I'm just disabling these. Once we get it all working, then I'll come back and delete them all together because I don't need them anymore. All right, some of these other ones down here that are tied to switch SE, because SE is the switch I'm going to use. These are just plain tracks, so I can actually leave those. I'm going to probably still use that. If I go back to my channel and I can watch my channels, so now the channels are no longer switching channels 5 and 6. That's disconnected from that. You need to assign whatever switch you want. Again, I'm using switch SE. That's just the voices. I don't have it actually doing anything. So I'm going to go into my model setup. All I need to do is go into your mix. I don't need to put it in an input. Inputs just basically let you manipulate that channel or that input, that stick movement, the switch or something if you want to change the rates on it, things like that. All we need to do is assign the turn on and off switch to one of the outputs for the receiver. So all I got to do is go into the mix to do this. Currently, the receiver uses channels 5 and 6 for this stuff. I want to use a different channel that's not one that has a servo output on it. So I'm going to use channel 7. So I'm going to create channel 7. I just click on new, the plus. So now I'm doing a mix for channel 7. Let's call this safe. Now the source for this, the source is going to be whatever switch you want to use. So in my case, I want to use the SE switch. When I click on source, all I got to do is flip the switch I want to use for that. And you see it automatically populates switch SE. I click the wheel or click on the thing if you've got EdgeTX touchscreen. So now my source is SE. Now if I watch up here in the channel output, if I flip my SE switch now, that switch is tied to channel 7 and the receiver can see that. I can confirm that further. I don't need to change weights or anything. I definitely don't want to change any weights. I don't need to do a switch. That's if you're using a different source and then you want to include also the switch. You don't need to mess with any of that. You overcomplicate things, you just give yourself a headache. So let me back out of that and I'll go over to the outputs. See now, if I look at my outputs, channels 5 and 6 aren't doing anything because there's nothing assigned to them. If I go down to channel 7 here and I flip my switch, that means channel 7 is actually being sent out to the receiver. So that's all I got to do to set up my safe channel at the transmitter level. Okay, so once I've done all that, the plane works. Now I'm ready to go in. I haven't actually turned the model on yet. I can actually do this next part before I do that. I'm going to press my system button. I'm going to go to the DSM forward programming 0.54. Just some information about how to set it up. You can read that. Now I have this extra menu here. Ignore that. That's because I have a simulator on. In the last episode I showed you how that works. So first thing I'm going to do is go to model setup. Now this first part, you're not actually connected to the receiver yet. This is still on the radio. This section is populating the DSM data tab in your models that we created in the first episode. It's a text file. And at the end of this, I'm going to get into that and show you that text file and kind of show you what all the different values mean, just in case you want to understand how that's working. So first thing you want to do is go to the aircraft type setup. Now I talked about maybe setting this thing up as a flaperon. I'm going to do that later. This one I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to go through and do a straight standard airplane, but I'm just going to open up the forward programming so that then I can tweak stuff from there. Aircraft type, airplane, helicopter, glider. So this stuff's not all complete. So for now, everybody's probably just going to be using airplane. Then click on next. Here's where you select your wing type. Our AeroScout is this. It's a single aileron. There's no flap. If you were going to change any of that, you would change that dual aileron. You can set up, and that way you can have separate channels for that. Initially, you might think that would be the flaperon setting, and it probably would work for that. But there is actually a flaperon mode, and that's what I would select if you're going to use flaperons, which is probably, this is the way I have my other one set up, my other AeroScout. And then we may do that later on. If you have a one aileron, one flap, you want to just set this up to however yours is. Dual aileron plus flap. So like for instance my Timber X would use, it's got a Y for the aileron and then it's got a single channel for flaps. That would be like the Timber X or the Turbo Timber. If you want to do something like Crow, for example, you would do a dual aileron plus flap. That way you could independently control these two ailerons to do Crow or something like that. Dual flap, dual aileron, that's something if you want to do full span ailerons. You could do a lot of crazy mixes with this one, because then you could do full span aileron, flaperon, crow. You can do almost any configuration if you set it up like that. But anyway, we won't get into too much of that detail. We're going to keep it simple here. Single aileron is the standard AeroScout setup. We're going to select that. Next one down is the tail type. Obviously this is a standard tail, single elevator, single rudder. If you had a V-tail, you just select all the different styles of that. So we're going to go standard. Rudder plus L, normal tail. Okay. And the next, you go through and you make sure all the channels are set. Now, if you're doing a normal wing, normal tail, all that stuff is standard. You haven't changed anything to a single, with flaps. If you have flaps, you're going to have to set that up separately. But with the standard AeroScout, there's none of that going on. So these channels should be all assigned properly at the beginning. Now, don't get confused with the ports versus the transmitter numbers. So the transmitter is AETR, that's aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder. Spektrum is TAER, so throttle, aileron, elevator, and rudder. So that's where you get these port numbers. Basically, it's converting AETR to TAER. But so make sure these are set right. If any of them are not, you could click on it and then change it to whatever it needs to be. We don't need to do that. Once you keep going through that, now those are the 4 ones that are relevant. Those are the ones that the gyro is going to use for its control. Unless you're using dual aileron, something like that, then it's going to add. There'll be another one here for the left and the right aileron, so you can have a different channel for each servo. As we keep going, that's all that setup you need for that, because those are the 4 channels that are used for the gyro. The gyro channel reverse, we don't need to do anything in there yet. When you first create, once you have a model created, the very first time you go into the forward programming script here, it's going to take these values over here on the side and it's going to put them in here. It really doesn't matter right now what those are. We got to test this anyway, so don't worry about changing any things at this time. You can also change all the way up to channel 10 with this. So we don't need to mess with that yet. So we're done there. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to get the model turned on, and then we're going to enter the forward programming mode. So let me go power up the model. All right, I got the model turned on. It is functioning, and I want you to see, since I don't have the safe, it's bound in safe mode, but since my switch is not, my channel's not functioning yet, it's not going in and out of safe mode. Yeah, it's in safe mode all the time right now because I converted my switch to use channel 7. So now let's go into the forward programming. Now, in the last episode, the first thing we did when we got this working is we went in here, we did a save to backup. Let's go ahead and do that again just to make sure I've got it. But that way, if anything goes wrong and we just screw it all up, we can always do a restore from backup. So let's save it. Now this save is done at the receiver level. So it takes that file that it creates, that backup file, and it saves it in a memory location on the actual receiver. So it can't go anywhere, it's not in your radio. It's just to show you also that we still have limited access to anything in here. Can't do anything much. Can only look at a couple things. And I don't have my switch set to anything, so I can't navigate, between modes or anything. I'm pretty much can't do much. Now, I did want to experiment with something first. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the factory reset. This is going to wipe out everything on there except for that backup file. So I'm going to do this. I was curious if I do this reset. So now if I go to Gyro, it's going to tell me I got to do my first time setup. See that? But I wanted to try something. Let's do a restore and see if it puts it right back where it was, or if it's now unlocked but I have access to things. So let's do a restore from backup. Okay, so now I've put it right back to where it was, supposedly. Let's look at my gyro settings now and see if anything's unlocked. No, see, it's right back to where it was. I still can't really do anything in here. That answers that. So let's reset it again. Okay, now the first thing, we just go through the first time setup. So we'll go next. Got some interesting messages here. I'm going to document that for the developer, see if he can identify what these unknowns are. Okay, so set the model level and press continue. I do have the model sitting flat on the ground. Okay, now it wants me to put the model on its nose and then press continue again. It's trying to establish which orientation the receiver is installed in the airplane. Okay, so now I have the plane sitting on its nose. Okay, so now it's figured out how I've got the transmitter mounted inside the airplane, and that is correct. You can manually change that if you need to. Okay, so if I needed to switch that, I could select this position 5 and pick something else, but I don't need to because it knows where it's at, and that is correct. Okay, so now I can continue from there. Now it wants me to select my gyro channel, so let's click that. So it says inhibit. Let's select that, and all I gotta do is flip my switch, which is my SE switch. Go down to next. Now apply that.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
Okay, it just rebooted the airplane. Now let's go back into the gyro setting. First thing we need to do is go into the F mode and set up a channel. All right, so now we're going to select the flight mode channel. It's going to be the same channel we use for SAFE. So I've turned it to channel 7. Now let's go down to next.
Medium rate, high rate.
So now it's letting me go through my 3 channels.
Medium rate. Safe mode.
It is reversed from what I would want. The switch away from me is what I like for my flight mode 1, which is safe. Now let's go back into our first time SAFE setup. We've already selected our channel. If we hadn't done that yet, we could do it here. We'll go continue. I think what I'm going to do is back out of this. I want to flip that channel around right now just so it's oriented right. So when I push it away from me, let's exit forward programming. Let's go to my model setup. See right now when I flip channel, I push it away from me, apparently I need it to say plus 100 when it's away from me, so I need to reverse that. So let's reverse channel 7. Go in here. Go over to the outputs. I'm going to go down to channel 7. And I want to invert that. Okay, so now you can see now it's away from me, it's flip-flopped the output versus the actual switch. Okay, now when it's away from me, it's plus 100. Now I'm going to go back into safe mode. The Relearn servo directions doesn't need to be done for the flight mode switch. So now I've got my switch pushed away from me, and I am in flight mode 1 that I want. If I put it in the middle, there's 2, and I go up, it's 3. So just to be clear on that, the Relearn servo directions is only for the flight control surfaces. You don't need to do that to reverse the toggle switch. Okay, so we're in good shape on that. Now we'll go back. Okay, so first time safe setup. We've already set our channel. Let's continue. Okay, I got it in my safe position, which is away from me. SE switch is away. It's flight mode 1. I'll hit next. Gains must be tuned to help reduce wobble. Next. Okay, so this is where you fine-tune the attitude trim for safe. And I think, if I remember right, this is one of the fixes that got corrected in version 0.54. In 0.53, I think it wasn't saving these values. So you can manually change these, but it automatically knows. Let me go grab the airplane. I'm going to set it flat on the ground. And if I hit level model and capture attitude, I click that button. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. All right. Now it wants to know your angle limits. And also whether or not you want safe enabled in flight mode 1. So if I switch between the different flight modes. Okay, so I'm in flight mode 1. I got flight mode selected. I can change any of these angle limits. So first I want safe mode. I want self-leveling. Let go of the sticks, it's going to self-level. If you go to envelope, it'll limit your bank angles, but when you let go of the sticks, it'll stay at that level. It won't let you go inverted, but it won't level itself. And then, of course, you can have it disabled. So my flight mode 1, I want self-leveling. And then your angle limits, this is left and right, it'll let you go to 60 degrees left, 60 degrees right, 40 degrees down, 50 degrees up. And all those things are to prevent you from going inverted. If you want a little more aggressive control in safe mode, but still have all the safe leveling, you can add more to this. A lot of people complain that it's so sluggish or lethargic in safe mode. It takes you really wide sweeping turns because you can't turn sharp enough. You could fine tune that here and get rid of that anomaly so that you could actually enjoy safe a little more, a little better. It wouldn't be so scary. For example, if you're flying in some high winds where you think safe might actually be helpful, in my experience, I had some high winds one time, and when I was just learning how to use this new airplane, plane's beeping at me. Anyway, if you're trying to fly in the wind and you don't have aggressive enough control surfaces, you'll have a hard time turning around. The wind's going to take you away, so you can increase these to get a little more control. Anyway, not to spend a lot of time on that, but so here's my flight mode 1, self-leveling, bank limits. All right, so flight mode 2 is what I want to use, the envelope mode. And this is also going to give me some bank limits. For now, I'm just going to leave those at the standard angle limits. So it'll be pretty much the same amount of control as I've got with safe mode, but it just won't self-level. Okay, so now we'll go to mode 3. This is my AS3X only, so I don't want any safe mode on in this mode. Okay, so now I can go next. I can hit apply. It's resetting the receiver. Okay, so now my safe modes are configured. Let's actually go into the F mode setup. So here's where you can actually customize your flight modes more specifically. So here's my AS3X only mode. You can see AS3X is active, safe mode is not. So if I want to change that, here's where I would do that. I can turn on a panic feature. I don't have a panic button configured yet, so if I want to use that, I would have to set that up elsewhere. There's flight mode 2, which is my envelope mode, and I can change that from here if I wanted to. But I don't. That's the mode I want. Again, I can add panic for that. And then flight mode 1, my safe mode. Now these, the standard configuration, the high throttle to pitch is activated. I'm going to turn that on. And then the low throttle to pitch. So what that does is when you increase the throttle, the elevator automatically pulls up to help on takeoff. So you can just pull up to on the runway in safe mode, throttle up. It's going to automatically, at full throttle, it's going to automatically give you up elevator, take off. You back up on the throttle, it'll lower the elevator. I mean, it really simplifies the whole process. So, some people, debatable whether that's good or bad, but to each their own. I think it's pretty good to have as available, and I kind of have fun playing around with it. I've got some new videos coming out where I'm using safe modes to do some tricky things. But anyway, that's what that is, the active. You can turn that off if you don't want that, to where you've got better control over the elevator. So, okay, good. We're good with our flight modes. I can go to safe settings. This is where I can go back in there and change my gains. I can change whether or not I'm using fixed or adjustable. So these are all set for fixed, which is I prefer. If you want to set one of your sliders, such as like your right slider or your left slider, or your knobs, you can set the gains up to that. So when you're flying around, you can fine-tune your gains to see what you like better. You get it too high, your plane will start oscillating and shaking. So you can play around with that. I've never had to deal with any of that stuff. It seems to work fine with the fixed rates that I've always used. You can go back in and adjust your angle limits if you want to change that. These are the values that we had when we set it up. And again, you just, whenever it says flight mode, you just flip your switch to go between the different flight modes that you want to adjust. Alright, so system setup. There's a few things in here we can do. We can relearn the servo settings, orientation, gain channel select. This is if you're going to use your gain, adjustable gain. And then safe and panic mode. So here's if I want to turn on panic mode. I click on that. Then I would have to assign a channel to that. You can customize that, add a delay in there, roll right, roll left. So anyway, this sets up the settings for panic. I don't ever use panic, but it's something you could play around with. Throttle to pitch. You can fine tune how much. So when you activate it in your flight modes, how much throttle to elevator mix it does. This is where you'd set that up. In there. Attitude trim. This is where I was talking about if you find that in safe mode it's constantly pulling up or down, you might be inclined to use your trim buttons to try to flatten that out. But when you're in safe mode, trim doesn't work because it's using the gyro for that information. So even if you trim it out, if it thinks it's not level, it's going to try to pull itself up or down or left or right. So you got to use this instead of your trim. That's just for safe mode only. And then you can select fail-safe flight mode. I'm just going to say flight mode 1. Basically, when you lose connection, it should default to flight mode 1. You can set up custom flight modes to get it to like loiter or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to set it to flight mode 1. And then fail-safe angles. You can change this stuff around to get it to, you know, roll left or right, pitch, you know, kind of a loiter mode, which is good. That way it doesn't just keep flying off miles away. Utilities here, if you want to activate more flight modes, you can do that here. Right now I've got 3 enabled. If I want 5, 6, you know, however, I can't remember how many you can have. Looks like you can have up to 10 different flight modes. But I'm just going to leave it at 3 for now. That's all I need. If you want to copy one mode to another one that you're creating, you can use that button. So I mean, we're essentially done here. We do need to check the control surfaces to make sure they go the right directions. Let's see if there's any other menus here we want to take a look at. So let's back out of this. I want to go in to the plane. I'll get the camera on the plane so you can see what I'm looking at, and make sure that the control surfaces are going the directions that we expect them to. Sometimes if that doesn't back out, just hold the back button down and it'll exit out. All right, so the plane's still responding. I don't know yet if the control surfaces are going the right direction, so let's get the camera on the plane and we'll take a look. Let's see if we can turn on the AS3X. All right, so my AS3X is not working right now. So let's fix that first. All right, so let's go into go to AS3X settings. Oh, maybe I never set it up for gains and stuff. Let's check fixed or adjustable gains. Oh, here we go. So I still had my AS3X. I hadn't gone through and set up my AS3X yet, so I missed a step. We want to go in and change the gains on AS3X to fixed. There we go. So I had forgotten about that. Missed a step. Let's back out of here. Now let's see if our AS3X is working. Okay, now it is. You can hear that. Let's check our safe modes, because that's the one that's the most obvious. When I go this direction, I don't know how much you can see. I'll get the phone and actually hold it on top of the wing. When I tip it up, safe mode would turn the elevator down to make us go down. And then on the elevators, or the ailerons, see if you can see this. If I tip it this way, I need that aileron to go down to push this wing back up. And so my aileron and my elevator are both acting in reverse right now. Which, if you remember that model setup, it automatically reversed those in our setup. So let's go ahead and do that change. Okay, we'll go back into system. Okay, let's go into there. We need to go in here to our model setup. We're going to go, now we're going to do the gyro reverse channels. So you can see how in my transmitter I have to reverse the, so that's the aileron, and that port 4 is the rudder. It had to reverse those because my transmitter reverses them, but I don't want the receiver to reverse them, so I need to change these to normal. Both of these are going backwards right now. Port 3, which is the transmitter channel 2, this one is reversed. This is the elevator, so let's change that. Okay. Next, I don't need to change any of these. Back. Okay, now I've done that. It's going to ask me to save them. Now when you save this, this is information we'll talk about in a bit, but this is where it saves those values, those control surface values, to that text file in your DSM data file. I'll show you that. So I hit save. See how it says it saved it? That's the model text file that it put it to, and you'll see that in your DSM data file. Hit complete. Now we got to go back into your Ford programming, go into the gyro settings, system setup, and I need to relearn the servo settings so it gets that new information. And when you do this, this is where it's sending that text file data over to the transmitter or to the receiver. Complete. Okay, so let's get out of that. Now let's retest safe mode. So let me check my control surfaces. Should still be moving in the right direction. Left, right, and they are up. That's interesting. So now my elevator is moving backwards with my stick. Rudder's correct. So if I go ahead and just fix my elevator in here, go over to the outputs page. Channel 2 is my elevator. Edit. I need to invert that. Okay. Okay, I'm going to invert my elevator. Okay, so now my elevator is functioning right from my stick. All right, so we're in safe mode. I tip it this way. You see that aileron is going down. And if I go up, see the aileron is going up to try to get this wing back down. So my aileron is working the right direction. Okay, now let's see if we can see that same response from the elevator. If I tip it down, there we go, you can kind of see that. So you can see the elevator is pulling up to try to bring me back to level. If I pull it up, the elevator is going down to try to bring me down. Hopefully you can see that, so it's kind of hard to show, but that is working properly. Now let's see if we can see that same anomaly on the you can't really tell on the rudder, but rudder's just for the AS3X part of it. But if you watch it, the aileron if you watch it as you're moving it side to side, the rudder will pitch towards the direction of your movement. If we move it this way, the rudder will pitch that way. This is very brief though, so can't really see it on camera. It's hard to capture. So, based on that, we got our ailerons fixed, elevators fixed. Let me see if I can capture that elevator to throttle mix. Alright, so when I was just testing the throttle to pitch, it didn't do anything. So if I have this go, I don't know, let's do something obvious so it looks like it's really moving. We'll put it at -30. We'll put this, crank this up to +30. I don't really know what this is going to do, so let's check it out. Alright. Alright, let's test that now. Alright. So it's going down just a little bit, sitting there. And you can watch as I increase throttle, it's going to pull up. So you see that as you give it more throttle, pitches the elevator up to try to get you off the ground. And I've got it up pretty dramatically, I think, that threshold. I'd have to play around with those settings to see exactly what they all do. It doesn't look like it does much down in that mode. A little bit. If I switch it out of AS3X and I go back to mode 1, you can see how far it moves just sitting there. So it does give you some down pitch. You don't want to go too far down because if you throttle down, you don't want it to just shoot towards the ground. So I don't really want that much up either, I don't think. So when I had those angles at 0, it didn't do anything to the elevator. So I don't exactly know what the threshold does. But it clearly goes a lot of elevator when you throttle up. So I don't know, let me drop this down. I never really played with this too much on my other plane. We set it to like 10. Maybe I'll just leave that one where it's at, because it didn't pitch down much, did it? Yeah, definitely a lot less up elevator now. And so that's with my elevator neutral. If I pull back on the stick all the way, that's as far as it moves up. So a lot of people are concerned that it doesn't move very far and they're worried about it, but that's because you're in safe mode, and it automatically limits your rates. I also want to remind you, when you do dual rates, when you have it in safe mode, don't put any less rates in it, leave it at 100%, because the receiver automatically gives you low rates while you're in safe mode. So you definitely don't want to do low rates and safe mode, or you're going to really have trouble. Okay, so I pull back on the stick all the way, and I'll put it in intermediate mode. You can see how much more rates you get. And if I go to high rates and my intermediate mode are the same. See, when you're not in safe mode, you get a lot more movement. A couple other pointers that you might want to consider as you get out and go do your maiden flight, or if you've already flown the plane, you're re-maiden. Now that you're going to do it again, get new settings. Just double check, triple check all your control surfaces, make sure everything's doing what you expect. Anything you make, time you make all these changes, you really got to be diligent. One important thing is, don't ever try to trim it while you're in self-level mode. If you're in safe mode and you run your trims up and down, it's not going to do anything, because the gyro is going to auto-correct back to what it thinks is level. So it doesn't matter what you do with your trims. But what's going to happen is, if you trim one of these, like say you trim your elevator way up or way down because it's pitching up or down, and then all of a sudden you go from safe, and you're doing that in safe mode, if you flip it out of safe mode into AS3X only mode, or even intermediate mode where the self-leveling is not on, well, then the trim is going to be in effect. And if you've just trimmed that thing way up or way down, the plane's going to pitch violently one way or the other. So don't ever do your trimming when it's in safe mode. So there's your big tip for the day. For those of you who have stuck around through that, I know most people will just want to figure out how to do that. If you want to get a little more of the in-depth stuff on how this all works, I'm going to get into that now, show you the DSM data files. Let me get my transmitter plugged into the computer here. All right, let's take a look at the DSM data file. So we just created a new one, or we had one and we modified it. If we go to our models, this is I've plugged into the radio, so you can see I'm on the USB. If I go to my DSM data file now, the newest one is today, the April 15th. That's the one we just modified. So let's take a look at what's in that file. So I went and kind of played around with the different aircraft types and things. So what you can see is this 1001. So this first bit here, that's the aircraft type. So 0 equals airplane. The other ones are mostly experimental, so I don't know if those matter. And then this 1002 is your wing type. 0 equals single aileron, dual aileron, flaperon. If it's a 2, so you can see it's a 0. That means we're in standard single aileron. 3 is your tail type. And then 10, 11, 12, 15, 17, these are all associated with the control surfaces that you're using. This is going to be the closest match to what we're doing here, so this should pretty much match. So this is the type of plane that we've got set up. If I was going to do flaperon, it would change it to this, and you can see when you change it to flaperon, for example, it reassigns, so you've got a left aileron and a right aileron, and then the associated channel with that. So this is what this file does, and as you modify it in your model data, and then you, when it said in the video when we were saving that, it's rewriting this file with the new setup, new control surfaces, wing type, any of that stuff that we've modified. It changes that. So as we've reversed it, so here's your reversing channels. 20, 21, 22, 23. If it's a 1, it's reversed. If it's 0, it's not. So you can see the default setup that I had when we first created that was 0, 1, 0, 1. If we go to 20 to 23 now you can see 0, 0, 1, 0. So it actually just flip-flopped these three, 21, 22, 23. Because we had to reverse the ailerons and the elevator and the rudder. So all three of those got swapped. Aileron, elevator, rudder. So that makes sense to you. So that's what that file is and what it does. It is generated the first time you go in. So this DSM data, when you just obviously create that folder, this file doesn't exist until you first go in to your forward programming. So if you created a new model, none of this would be there. The second you go and enter forward programming, it generates this file and it uses default settings. So some of the default settings are how you've got your plane configured. It doesn't immediately know what kind of wing type and stuff, so that's just defaults to standard elevator, standard wing type and standard tail. So that's what that is. I'll show you real quick. I'll put links to this below, but the Frankie Arzo, or Francisco Arzo, his GitHub channel or page is where you're going to get that updated forward programming, and he's redesigned this or set it up. I don't know if this was there before, but I didn't know it, so it's a little tricky to get. What I would go to his default page, which is this one here. I'll send the link to that, but github.com, Frankie Arzo DSMTools, and then I just grabbed this entire thing. If you go to code here, download the zip file. Once you download that zip file, you're going to have all of this stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff here you may or may not want to use. What we just used today is the forward programming. I used the color 480 by 272. And then this April 11th, that is the current one as of today. So here's what you get when you get that zip file. Basically everything you saw there. What we used today was this, and then unpack the April 11th, and that'll give you this. And if you just put that directly into your model, or your SD card, it'll automatically put these where you need them. But basically it creates that model DSM data folder, nothing in it, but it generates that as you go. And then it gives your scripts, tools, and it, if you previously had version 0.53, you need to delete this DSM lib folder to make sure there's no conflicts. I don't know if this will overwrite it if you just drop it straight in there. It'll ask you to overwrite some of the stuff. I just don't know if it'll overwrite everything. So my recommendation would be to delete your old DSM lib folder so it gets all the new stuff that you need in there and doesn't give anything that's incorrect. This one here, this min, this is a small sized one. It does have limited functionality, but this is for low memory units like Toro. I don't know for sure about the Boxer, but it does some other radios. He mentions them on his GitHub page, I think. Minimal version, yeah, FrSky QX7. Looks like he's got a 0.55 in development that will be for a Boxer. So yeah, so there we have it. The Boxer will be a different version. He's still working on that. So those are the files you need. The names are the same. So if you were to just dump that in your folder, it would. It's not named differently. It doesn't say what version it is until you actually get it on the radio and then pull it up. It'll show you the version number. But so there's the new one on that. The other exciting new thing. I back up here a ways. The EdgeTX firmware, he's got some custom firmware in here. If you just want to experiment with the Avian ESC programming, this TextGen function or feature that he's created, and I'll link to his video on that below. I'll probably do a future video on setting that up as well. But this TextGen, it gets you the Avian programming functionality, so you can set up reverse programming, like in a Turbo Timber Evolution, for example, that we'll probably be playing with later on. This TextGen gives you the ability to set up the reverse thrust. I don't know what that one is, I forgot. This GPS fix, that includes the TextGen as well as the Spektrum GPS module fix that he was working on. I don't have any of that equipment, so I don't have any way to test any of that stuff or know what it is, but I do the TextGen. So anyway, so that's that. If you need to get that firmware, there's you got to be educate yourself on how to update firmware. You move that into your radio, into your firmware folder, and run your bootloader, or just run the firmware from the radio. There's a lot of videos on how to do that. Just be cautious when you do that. Make sure you back up your radio first before you fiddle with that stuff, so you don't mess something up. So that's exciting stuff. He did say that it's going to get migrated into the full non-custom version of the EdgeTX, the public release of that soon. So that'll be neat. It'll have that capability. So there will be almost nothing we can't do with our Radiomaster TX16Ss here shortly. I don't know what the telemetry thing is. He's got some pretty cool stuff in here. He's a brilliant man. He's been doing a lot of cool stuff with forward programming and all this EdgeTX stuff. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to talk to him quite a bit and have him help me out and getting set up with these things. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to watch these videos. Hopefully they've been helpful. If you have any questions or anything, drop them in the comments. Keep an eye out for future videos. This is pretty much the end of the three episode series I wanted to do on forward programming. There will be some random videos throughout, adding some things as we learn more stuff, if there's updates. I haven't really given any attention to the AR631, although it was in the topic of these videos. It is a little different, at least the one I've got in we have in our Turbo Timber Evolution. It's not completely locked up. You can get in there by default and modify the channels and some of the settings. So I'm going to do a future video where I get into the AR631 TA on the Turbo Timber Evolution. We'll see what its capabilities are without unlocking it with the EdgeTX forward programming firmware or Lua script. And then I'll probably get into the TextGen functionality and show you how to set up reverse thrust using the Frankie's new script on that. So exciting stuff. So keep an eye out for future episodes, and appreciate you stopping by. Take care.